Okay, we're live. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Today's guest is Brian Hauser. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
It's going really well. How are you all?
I'm. Oh, yeah. I just got re-diagnosed with shingles, which is pretty
Oh,
rare. So that's fun. So anyway,
Chicken pox.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, Brian wrote a book called Memento Mori, um, The Fathomless Shadows, if I remember that correctly.
yes.
Um, why don't we do introductions? By the way, Matt's not here. We're not going to have a prize this week, but pretty soon, next couple of
What?
weeks, I'm going to have a prize.
I can do a prize.
The prize is going to be two. Um, the HP Love, the Doctor Who Big Finish, Doctor Who audio productions. They just did a Lovecraft audio drama, the Lovecraft Invasion, I think it's
Yes.
called, and they're offering me two downloads to give away. So we're going to be doing that soon. So if you're interested in Doctor Who and Lovecraft, then stay tuned the next couple of weeks. So, and we won't do a prize because Matt has to curate the emails and everything, Pete. So it's fine. So,
Whatever.
why don't we do introductions and talk to Brian? Mike Davis, Lovecraft eZine, and Rick.
Rick Lee, writer.
Pete.
Pete Rollick, madman, alcoholic. I used to drive a PT Cruiser.
Bridget.
Hi, Bridget, composer, artist. Got some music coming out come this spooky Halloween season.
Cool. Keep me posted.
Yes.
And then, Brian, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself? And then I got a couple of things, and then I think Pete's the one who introduced me to this book, and I have read it, and I've got a lot of highlights, which means I really like a book. So, but just a little bit about your background for a minute, and then we'll get back to you in just a second after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian Hauser, I, for 20 years, have been an academic, trained in film studies, and focusing on really weird cinema, horror cinema. Trained in an English department, so I do a fair amount of literature too. But have also been a screenwriter and a filmmaker during that time, and finally just got around to writing a novel because the budgets are so low. They were easy to get greenlit, much easier than getting a film greenlit. That's basically me. I left my professor position last year to move with my partner to central Pennsylvania. And so I've been focusing a lot more on writing over this past year, but I am picking up a couple of courses in these COVID times. So that's me.
Good.
And where are you teaching?
I'm teaching for Kutztown University, which is actually a couple hours away from where we are right now. My partner Christina is a political scientist at Bucknell University. So we're in Lewisburg, and Kutztown's about 2 hours away.
Okay. I'm from Philadelphia, so.
Oh, great! Yeah, absolutely, cool.
Yeah. You have your Amish blanket?
Well, having moved from northern New York, where we were actually like in the center of Amish living, buggies up and down the street all the time, we were kind of surrounded with that for the past 7 years, and so having them down near Lancaster is a little different for us.
Okay.
So, again, just a reminder that pretty much everyone here is a creator of some sort. So if you go to the Lovecraft eZine website, lovecraftezine.com, you click on podcast on the top left, and you'll see a schedule. You'll see who's the guests are for the next few months. But then if you scroll down below that, you'll see the usual panelists. and most of them are hyperlinked. So Bridget, for example, I've got hyperlinked to her online shop and so forth, and Rick and Pete have got hyperlinked to their Amazon pages. So support them for helping me out. I appreciate that, and I think they probably would too. I've got a Patreon, and I'm very, very poor, so could use the help. Just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. Each level you get different cool things. So I want to read something, and then Pete, gonna have you, because Pete introduced me to this book, because we were talking on a previous, speaking of Patreons, previous Patreon only podcast about King in Yellow themed movies, books. That's just that sort of theme, if I remember correctly. Right, Pete and Rick?
Yep. Yes, we were.
Can't remember if you were there, Bridget, or not. I'm not sure. But anyway, Pete told me about that, about this book, Memento Mori, Brian's book, Memento Mori, The Fathomless Shadows, which you'll have to remember that last part, because if you just type Memento Mori into Amazon, you're going to get a lot of results. But I also have it hyperlinked in the show notes. So if you're watching on YouTube, or I've been putting these on Facebook later, or if you're listening later to the audio only edition, it'll be in the show notes, so you don't actually have to go searching for it. I'll read you something that Pete blurbed about the book, and I bought the book because Pete told me to buy the book. Okay, which is really all you need to know. We could probably just close the show now and say Pete said read this, so you know it's good. But it is so fascinating. So I'm reading Pete's blurb. I want to tell you about Brian Hauser's Memento Mori. I want to tell you about the fanzine that reopened the door, and the memoir and the lost films. I want to tell you about the medium being the message, how that message is transmitted, and how it can be transformed through translation into different new media. How the message is corrupt and corrupting, infected and infectious. I want to tell you about Tina Mori, C.C. Waite, and the disappearance of Billy Jacobs. I want to tell you these things and how they all spiral together into a coherent wave of madness. But I can't. Brian Hauser won't let me. It's not my place. I have seen, but you must see, must read for yourself. Come and see. Say that you will. Please, will you come? And after I read that blurb, I was like, okay, well, I really got to read this. And that's just several blurbs at the beginning of the book. So, Pete, you want to take it away?
No, but I will.
Well, one thing you did say to me, that this was an excellent way to blurb the book and give away absolutely nothing about it, which you have to do.
So Ross Lockhart sent me the book to read and blurb. And Ross Lockhart at Word Horde.
Right.
And I read the book and I was just overwhelmed. But like you said, and what I'm intimidating here is that, if I tell you about any of this stuff, I'm going to give away way too much because I want to share, because the book is infectious. You want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But you can't, because then you give away too much. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that I said in there makes me sound like I've studied film and book and literature for like a decade. And, really I haven't. The book is just really, really good. And it kind of gives you an education into filmmaking and underground filmmaking. And I shouldn't be talking about this. Brian should be talking about this. So, Brian, tell us about this book and what the hell did you do to us?
And this is a no spoiler show, so
yeah, no,
if that's even possible
I will do my absolute best.
But as far as the beginning goes, you could just sort of say, hey, it starts off with this, and
Right.
Whatever you want to say.
I think I can talk generally enough. I respect people's desires for no spoilers, right? Whether it's my work or not. So here was the deal. I love Chambers' King in Yellow stories, and I like a lot of what other people have done with them, and I wanted to be able to do that thing. You know, I wanted to be able to convey what Chambers and others can do, which I find a particular kind of weird fiction. I think what Chambers does and what the best of the King in Yellow stories do is much more oblique than a lot of other weird fiction. So it sort of comes in slant, but it still has this real effect. It has an impact. And so a lot of it was a kind of like, I would love to be able to do this. I'm not sure if I can. As often happens with me, what the genesis of this was cobbling together a number of different inspirations, that things that wanted to be something, but probably weren't going to take off on their own. And so there's like an alchemy there, right? And they start working together. And so it was, some of these different reagents started really cooking together. And then I was like, okay, now I see what's going on. And Pete commenting that there's a bit of an education in there is me not being able to shut off my professor, vibe, right? Just not possible. It's for a novel that's told in it's a documentary novel, right? It's a collection of other texts, sort of like Dracula. And so one is a fanzine, right? A sort of mid-90s fanzine starts us off after a academic introduction. But then it's a memoir, but written by anthropologist, right? Written by an ethnobotanist, who I was allowed to have an academic voice of a kind for the bulk of the novel, even though it was a very different person from me. And then it ends with a personal letter that was sort of way outside my wheelhouse, and that's actually where I had to do a lot of work. A little bit left over there at the end. Like I said, it's a kind of alchemy getting through it. It was tough to put together. It was really challenging in a lot of ways. But I was in some ways so surprised to get to the end and sort of feel like it probably worked. And I didn't know until I started showing it to a couple people whether or not it did, but it seems like it probably did what I was hoping it would do.
It certainly did for me.
It works really well. It kind of reminds me of Lovecraft's uncorrelated contents.
Yeah.
Where I have this and I have this, and if you don't ever put them together, they mean nothing.
Yeah.
But then, and first I wanted to ask, and was this written or started to write as for the Lost Film Anthology?
No.
Okay. No. Because the timing is just perfect.
Yeah.
Like the Lost Film Anthology came out, and then this came out, and the two were just like bookends on my shelf.
So I remember the Lost Films call for subs coming out, and part of me was sort of like, but I didn't actually want to it wasn't done, and I didn't want to let any of it go.
Yep.
Yeah. Who edited that?
What's that?
Who edited that, Pete or whoever?
Max Booth and Michelle.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've read that. It sounds like I need to.
That's a really solid anthology. There's such great work in there.
There's two. There's Lost Films, Lost Transmissions, and they just put out a call for a third one.
Yeah. Lost Contacts.
Right.
Okay. Well, if you guys are watching them, I'll definitely take a couple of review copies of the first two. Well, it's just both of those things. It's in Lost Transmissions. This whole thing, I don't know. I can't articulate very well why it works together so well, but it's kind of like Pete. It's kind of like AM 1200.
Yes.
And what drew me in, and I think you in, to that movie. It looks like you're nodding your head, Brian. So it looks like you've seen that movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this guy's driving in the middle of the desert, and all of a sudden he gets this, in the middle of the night, a weird call. Well, I mean, weird transmission from an AM radio station. It's just that kind of stuff. By the way, if you haven't seen it, it's really good, and it's free to watch on YouTube. It used to be very hard to find, and I believe it's the director who put it out on YouTube, so watch it guilt-free. But yeah, I can't articulate very well at all why that stuff gels together and why it's so appealing, but it certainly is. I want to read the synopsis, and then I want to let Pete get back to his interrogation.
I don't know if it's going to be interrogation, but okay.
It's going to be an interrogation under a bright light. Yeah.
There are three lights?
And when we're done, Brian will be a broken man. So
more broken.
Yes, exactly. If you're watching this and you're like, okay, this sounds great, or you're listening to this and you're like, this sounds great, but what the hell are we talking about here? I'm going to read the Amazon synopsis, which doesn't really give anything away, but it'll give you just kind of a more overall idea. Underground filmmaker Tina Mori became a legend in the late 1970s with a stolen camera, a series of visionary Super 8 shorts, and a single feature film heralded as her masterpiece, Dragon's Teeth. Then she disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Right away, I'm just like, I love this. Was it foul play, or did Tina Mori go somewhere else? And if so, where? Could it have been the otherworldly Carcosa so often referenced in her films? I so wish our friend Joe could have read this book, because Brian, I think Pete and I and Rick know Joe well enough to say that he would have loved this book, if that's any consolation.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Don't you guys agree? If you disagree, don't hesitate to say so. But I think he would have loved it. I mean, the King Yellow's reference, Carcosa's reference in the book, and these aren't just throwaway things to make it Carcosian or whatever. They fit.
Right, but
the rest
it's not,
of the synopsis.
It's not beating you over the head with it either.
No, exactly.
It's very well crafted and subtle.
Yeah.
And
the last part of this is through many layers, including letters, a zine made by a teenage horror film fan, and a memoir written by Mori's college roommate and muse. Film historian and debut novelist Brian Hauser delves deep into Tina Mori's life and legacy, exploring the strange depths and fathomless shadows situated between truth, fiction, fantasy, and the uncanny. Now, you're a film historian. I'd like for Pete to get into that too, of course. I am the furthest thing from that. But you did this so well that I'm like, Tina Mori. I'm Googling Tina Mori. I'm like, she must have been a real person. I mean, you really kicked down the fourth wall here, blurred the lines between fiction and reality. So well. So that's the Amazon synopsis for anyone listening, if that helps you. So yes, go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah. So first of all, it's most of the action takes place in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some follow-up. The zine is what, from the 80s, maybe?
It's mid-90s, actually. It's around the time that Scream comes out. So it's sort of 95, 96.
But I can remember I was a kid in the 70s. And I can remember watching, we're going to do a bit of film historian here, Equinox.
Yeah.
Which is essentially an underground film made by college students with a cameo by Fritz Lieber.
Right.
And some really badly done but practical special effects.
Mhm.
And reading this book, I get that feeling about Equinox, that, you know, I don't have a lot of money. I have some skills, and I'm going to make it work.
Yeah.
Even if it looks ridiculous. And somehow you turn it into art.
Yeah.
With a Super 8 camera. And I had a Super 8 camera growing up. You know, I made a short film, you know, with little armament covered in Play-Doh.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. You know, you just move them, take a shot. Move them, take a shot. But here we're talking about, you know, this story spans a good deal of time, maybe 45 years, right?
Mhm.
You've got the filmmaking, the zine making, and then the person who has decided that zines need to be saved.
Right.
And that sort of opens up the rabbit hole. Because the zine is, all zines are really about something else.
Yes.
And, you know, zines in their day were the weird chat rooms and memes and by the way, I did this weird historical research, and I think this that you see on the internet post now, you know, Reddit is essentially an online zine for a variety of things.
Yeah.
So
It
how did this
spawned so
all
many
come about?
things,
What
too.
did you do to put this all together?
Sure. There is, I think, a really good story here, and I'll do my best to give you the sort of the encapsulated version of this story. This is the film historian part, because there were several parts that came together. And this is a big part. It just fell into my lap. So I was a professor of film and literature at Clarkson University. This is Potsdam, New York. It's up, you know, just a few miles from the St. Lawrence River and the Canadian border, right? Above the Adirondacks. And this is the college where Wes Craven taught when he was in his mid-20s. He had graduated with his master's from Johns Hopkins, you know, master's in fiction writing. And he had a couple of college teaching jobs, and this was the second one of them. And so he's teaching at Clarkson College of Technology at the time. He's got a young family, right, at this time. And, you know, he's just teaching humanities classes, keeping his head down, basically, having a pretty good time. And then these students, this is 1968, spring of 1968. These students and Clarkson is a technical college, right? It is a STEM school. It's engineers and scientists, right? They had a newly formed drama club, and they were trying to do the play that's in the middle of Giles Goat Boy, this novel. And but the drama production falls apart in the springs. They're like, you know, people get mono, the whole thing just implodes. And so these two students who were sort of the prime mover in that production said, like, well, I think Professor Craven has a movie camera. What if we made a movie? And it turns out Wes had this Revere 16 millimeter wind up movie camera, right? So they went and asked him if he was interested, like, you know, would you shoot it? And he's like, yeah, that sounds like fun, right? I'll shoot it. And so, you know, they went through this whole thing, and they make this student film called Pandora Experimentia, right? 1968, it's 45-minute color, 16 millimeter. And I think there's a really good argument that this is what convinces Wes Craven that he needs to be a filmmaker. Right? He was going to be a novelist.
Okay.
And so he quits Clarkson and goes to New York City and tries to break into the movie business. And there's a little bit of a hiccup there, but eventually, like within a year and a half or so, he manages to break into the business. He hooks up with Sean Cunningham, right? And they do Last House on the Left, and then Sean does Friday the 13th, right? You know, I'm like, they sort of move along, and Wes launches his career within about 3 years, right? And so this, Wes actually borrowed the only copy of this film, Pandora Experimentia, to sort of use as a show reel. This is what I can do. And the students who owned it never saw it again, right? They never got it back. And so the sort of the culmination for me is that a new film festival was launched in Canton, New York, which is 8 miles down the road from Potsdam, the St. Lawrence International Film Festival, cross-border Canadian-American film festival. And the founder of it wanted to show for the first time Nightmare on Elm Street on Elm Street, because Potsdam, of course, has an Elm Street. And there are all these legends about, you know, that our Elm Street is the Elm Street, right? And that the boiler room of Clarkson, Maine is the boiler room in Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, and so on and so forth. None of these things are true, basically, right? Except that Wes Craven was there and he helped make a movie with students. Wasn't a horror film, wasn't a spoof of a horror film, nothing like this. So, you know, I started doing all this research about Wes and his time at Potsdam, and I found all this stuff about that period and his early, you know, filmmaking life and his early life. And so this was the soil that the novel was eventually born in, because I didn't think that was my story to tell. And I definitely didn't think it was my story to tell if we couldn't find the film, right? And this was, we wanted to have Wes come and be part of that, but that was actually the summer that he passed away. This is 2015. So like, you know, we did the screening and I had one of those students from 68 come and, you know, we showed Nightmare on Elm Street and he talked about Wes and his experience making a movie with him, you know, 45 years before. Had a great time and I learned a lot and it was amazing, but I was just like, I don't know that I can do anything with this as a scholar. And so it sat there for a year and a half or so. And then I just started, a couple other inspirations sort of gelled with it. And then I was like, here we go. Lost film in the North Country. And then I started, you know, moving in other elements that were really interesting to me. So really the core and the dedication of Memento Mori is to Ken, John, and Wes. Ken and John are the two students, and then Wes Craven and what they found in the North Country. Because that's really the thing that launched it for me.
Hey, Brian, what
Yeah.
what did you say the name of that film was that he...
It's Pandora Experimentia.
Is it available to see anywhere?
No one knows where it is. It is, in fact, currently a lost film, right? And so there was only ever one copy of it. John lent it to Wes. So, you know, Wes had it in his possession, but when he passed away, Ken Lyon, who is, you know, John and Ken Lyon, was in contact with the Craven estate and had both the lawyers and then later family members look through Wes's storage. And they were nice enough to do so, but no one found the film. And my speculation is that Wes was somebody who didn't always like to look back. And I think he probably got rid of it at some point. And it may well have just degraded. Like, you know, at a certain, if you don't preserve it, right, at a certain point, a 16 millimeter, you know, acetate celluloid is just, it's going to degrade over time. So it might have just sort of turned to vinegar and, you know, not have been something that could have been rescued all that easily. But he also might have gotten rid of it because it was juvenilia for him. You know, it was something that he wouldn't have wanted people to see. That might have been his position on it. I know a lot of people who want to see it. But yeah, there's a Facebook page, In Search of Pandora Experimentia, which is largely about gathering reminiscences from Clarkson and Potsdam State College alumni who were part of the movie. So we have sort of like an oral history of that film, but we don't have the film.
And then, Pete, before you take over again, I want to comment on what you said about Reddit being essentially an online fanzine of sorts in a lot of ways. And it spawned so much, hasn't it? I mean, the book Pen Pal, for anyone out there who hasn't read Pen Pal, don't read anything about it. I like to say this about movies too. Go in cold and just read the book. It's one of the creepiest books I've ever read. I mean, that came from Reddit. So much creepypasta came from Reddit, you know. So anyway, Pete.
No. So just for my own edification, John and Ken, what did they end up doing?
So John actually, Ken winds up in many ways, really being deeply inspired by Wes as a writer. And so Wes helps Ken get into Johns Hopkins Masters of Writing program. And Ken, is a sort of thoroughgoing poet. And when he graduated from there, he went into education. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. He had a long career as a public educator, later sort of as a principal eventually, right? And then retired, still lives up there around Seattle, and is a wonderful guy. I've only had email correspondence, relatively brief, with John. John continued his career as an engineer. Yeah.
People, the world is weird, right?
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting that, it's interesting to think back, here's an engineer and here's a public educator, but secretly,
right,
in 1968, I worked with Wes Craven on a lost film. It's like, if you said that to somebody, they'd be like, yeah, get out of here.
No,
it's just, yeah, okay. So, all right, so that's where the film aspect comes from.
Right.
Where does the fanzine aspect come from?
So the fanzine aspect really comes from my own inclinations with regard to art and creativity. That I have been fascinated pretty much forever in the DIY. Okay, look, I have these tools at my disposal, whether it is a typewriter or later on a video camera. And then later on, when I start making some money, actual film cameras, whether they're 8mm film or Super 8 or 16. And then I have a phone in my pocket that can make even better looking movies, like the whole thing. And as a film scholar, I've always been fascinated by the people who take essentially consumer grade equipment and make what they want to make outside of the industry. So I'm also then interested in punk, right? And in Riot Girls and things like that, because they're doing what they're doing outside the mainstream for the most part. And there's both political reasons for that and economic reasons for that, and sometimes creative reasons for that. So yeah, the zine part was very much, I thought, if you're going to be, I knew about, say, the cinema of transgression in, New York, late 70s, early 80s, the post-punk filmmakers, but I probably knew more about sort of beat filmmakers in the late 50s, early 60s, and then just like the new American movement. So in American independence, John Cassavetes, for instance, right, like making Shadows in the late 1950s by going on Gene Shepard's radio show and saying, if each of your listeners sent me $2, I could make a movie, right? And Shepard's listeners did, and then John Cassavetes went out and made this movie, so you're just like, that's awesome. He crowdsourced this feature film, and then released it in the late 1950s. And this really, in many ways, it's not maybe the launch, but it's one of those early hallmarks of American independent cinema at the end of the studio era, right? And then moving into the 60s and the 70s that lead us into the blockbuster era. So that stuff I just love, because it's like I could make these movies, right? And so eventually, originally, actually, that first section wasn't going to be a zine. It was going to be a feature article in something like Vanity Fair or Rolling Stone. It was going to be some journalist writing about Tina Mori. And the problem I had with that was actually this, it was sort of a geeky problem. Those feature articles are not as long as they seem in terms of word count.
Right.
And so I was just like, wow, the kind of intro that I want to do, I can't do it and make it a realistic feature article for a magazine. But then I started thinking about zines and just standard zine formatting. And I was like, I bet you it's a stretch, it's a lot of words, but I think I can jam this into what would actually look like a zine.
Right. And I can remember when in the 90s, when I was big into, the South Florida Science Fiction Society, the society had a Ricoh copier,
Yeah.
and we were always looking for some member who had access to an office at night, so that even if we couldn't use their copier and their printer, we could at least have space to fold and staple and bind. And for me, zines were always made with other people's cast off equipment,
Yes.
and that's how things got done. Oh,
You had access, but you didn't have funds. You had access.
you had access. It's like, oh, you're going to throw that away? We'll take that.
Right.
Because the equipment was either too old or too obsolete, or just it didn't function enough for business purposes.
Right.
But if you had slave labor,
No, and this is a classic move in the independent film community as well, that so often indie filmmakers who are working with celluloid, so generally not now as much, but in the past, they would ask for cast-offs, right? And so not a full 400-foot reel or anything like that, but just like, do you have like the 60 feet that weren't used at the end of this, right? And I'll just take as many of those as you have, and I'll use that, right? Or if
I can force it, I can make it work.
I can make this work. Another big one, the novel references Maya Deren, right? The sort of amazing surrealist avant-garde filmmaker in the 40s and 50s. And so she shot in 35 millimeter a lot of the time, handheld 35 millimeter camera. And she was using, so they had this huge surplus after World War II of gun camera film. A lot of fighter planes had 35 millimeter cameras installed in the wing, right? And so it was this black and white, really high contrast, kind of crappy film in a lot of ways, really durable. But they would use it to it's, like instant replay kind of stuff, and recording of dogfights usually. But then there's just this massive stockpile of it, and you could get it really cheap. But it didn't look that great, but that helped develop a sort of, the black and white indie style. Right. You could make 35 millimeter short films relatively inexpensively by getting that kind of stock.
You mentioned zines, and since this won't work for those listening later in their cars or whatnot, but before the show, can you show the audience?
Yeah, so this was one of the first pieces of fan art for Memento Mori. So the intro section of the novel is this zine, and it's called Final Girl, and triple R like Riot Girl, Final Girl number 5. So this zine is the full text of Final Girl number 5 from the novel, so these are illustrations from the creator's daughter. He has she's, I think at the time she was maybe 11, maybe 12. And then some other images that, he put in there, not hand drawn, but it's all of the elements from Final Girl 5, the review of the Canadian horror film, The Mask, the 3D film, in Onibaba. So it's got all the stuff in it. And it's also really cool. In addition to typewriter, pica, it's got some really cool early 90s fonts, from whether it's, Print Shop or a Mac, right, in 94, 95, something like that. So it's wonderful. I have the digital copy of it as well, which is in color. And there's this really judicious use of yellow in it. It's pretty amazing.
So the other thing that I can remember, well, and I have them, and I have a complete run of Crypt of Cthulhu now.
Yeah.
From 1 to 100, and some other things as well. I have a whole bunch of Willem Pugmire fanzines that he produced when he was much younger.
Yeah.
But none of it is made to last.
Right.
It's bad paper, it's bad staples, it's bad ink, and most of it just falls apart if you're not really, really careful.
But it's stapled with love.
It's stapled with love, but that actually causes the staples to rust.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can remember somebody was looking at my collection and they said, you should really replace these staples.
Mhm.
All you have to do is pull the staples out and feed the pages through they're still the same size. Excuse me, I was sneezing. And I was like, no. The rust is important.
Yeah.
It's stained pages. I don't want to be, I don't want to replace that stuff.
Yeah.
But so when your character, your opening character is looking for Riot Girl number 5, the chances are really, really small. First of all, there's only a handful of issues ever printed.
Right.
Second of all, most of them were probably thrown away, if not by the person who read it, by their parents. It was like, what the hell is this garbage? Because it's worse than comic books.
Right.
There is no professional standard here whatsoever. And then even if somebody did keep it, it's slowly decomposing in whatever box or shelf that it's in. So, I think of myself as a book scout. I'm always on the look for weird stuff. And finding fanzines is okay. I know nothing about this except I know that these are not going to be common. And, in comparison, if you compare, say, the comic book standard to eerie or creepy, the Warren standard, the two were very, very different. The comic book paper was much better, and the Warren publishing house paper was just one step above newsprint.
Right.
And the covers just ripped, and these are the fanzines are even worse.
Yeah.
So, you're opening up the book with this, and you've got me hooked. And then you take it in a completely different direction. The fanzine is just bait because it goes into film.
Yeah.
And college careers, and really sort of this punk movie making experience and living rough in New York City. And slowly blending in with Carcosa and sort of this existential dread that sits outside our world. What brought that on? I mean, we haven't. You've got film, and Wes Craven's going to get you into horror, sure. But where do you go? How do you take that right turn into Carcosa?
Yeah, I think. That was thinking. Fairly well steeped in a lot of different weird fiction, and I didn't have what I thought was a sort of brainstorm or just amazingly original idea of my own for something weird. And I actually feel really deeply the long tradition of writers writing in other people's sandboxes, right? Especially in weird fiction. And so I thought, like, this is the thing I would like to do. Like, I would like to write a King in Yellow story. And I think that this is the thing that works. And because the central tenet of the King in Yellow stories is that there is this art that has real effect. It's not aesthetics. It's not like, oh, this is beautiful if you appreciate it, but rather this thing will drive you insane, right? This thing will rip apart your understanding of the fabric of reality, and it will force you to experience reality in this fashion, and we're never going to explain it, and there's no mechanics of it. And so both, I wanted to be able to see if I could bring about, if I could evoke that kind of weird aesthetic effect, which I really just loved. But I also just thought it was perfectly appropriate that zines are about the way that art made people feel, whether it's punk music or it's movies or it's comic books or whatever it is. Like, something inspired the zine maker to want to say something, right? And it made them create.
And it wasn't something it was something they weren't seeing already.
Yes. Right. And so, this is the thing, I think, and I don't think this is a spoiler either. This is what links all of these documents together, right? It's that art has power. Art forces people to do things. And in this particular world, this piece of art actually forces people to do things. And so that was the reason. Like, I could have pretty easily written, I would not easily, but I could have gone a Lovecraft mythos route,
Right.
or really anything. I mean, there's so many stories that I find inspiring, but this one seemed perfectly appropriate because of that, the dread influence of art.
Right. And Tina Mori spends years, and she kills her college career
Yeah.
trying to produce something that will drive people insane, but at the same time, the production of it and not producing it is driving her insane. And risky behaviors, and I will do anything to get my vision on film.
Yep.
And including destroying relationships and everything.
Yeah.
And then finally disappearing.
This
And-
theme of a piece of art, whether it's a film, a book, whatever, causing you to, as you were saying, Brian, as both of you were saying, see reality how it is, or drive you crazy, or or whatnot. That was one of the main things we were talking about in our King in Yellow Patreon podcast. I just looked it up. That's June 6th of this year, for any of you who are a patron. And if you're not, it's just $5 a month, so it's not much. But my point is that we came up with a list, Pete, of some of these things, and that's one of the ways that you, I believe, introduced me to Brian's book. And then the other question I have real quick, before I forget, was that Margot Kidder on the cover of the zine?
No. So it's we have Laurie
that's
Strode, right? Jamie Lee Curtis, and then
okay.
Ripley.
All right. Well, it made me think of a question that possibly only you two can answer, and Rick. So I stumbled across this recently on Amazon. I didn't buy it, and I regretted it ever since because I can't find it. I can't think of a good search string for it. And it's a fiction book, but part of it has to do with this guy being obsessed with Margot Kidder. And it was just written in the last few years. So, no, nothing. Well,
No, I mean, there's something vaguely familiar about this. Pete, did you?
I have no.
if anybody else out there knows, if you're watching later, email me, lovecraftezine@gmail.com, or you can, if you're watching live, you can type it in the chat. So,
But Mike, you bring up an interesting point.
yeah.
And I've had the same problem, and I think that you could make a story, and it would be viable and believable, about someone who sees something available on Amazon or eBay and spends the rest of their life trying to find it again.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I thought, and futurists thought, that when we went digital, everything would be available.
Right.
And that's not how it's worked out.
Yeah,
Everything
it's
might
easy
be
to believe. You
available.
can find so many things that you couldn't find before. Don't get me wrong, but it's easy to believe because of that, Pete. You can find everything that you're looking for. Well, the name Margot Kidder is just, that's too common of a phrase for me.
Yep.
It's on Amazon. We know this, but where? That's like saying it's on planet Earth somewhere.
Right.
I mean, yeah, and there's so much being produced that you and Matt and I have this problem because we collect Lovecraftian mythos. There's too much being produced to get it all.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go back to try and find it, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I have books in my want list that existed for a week. Now I can't find ever again.
Yep.
And were they real? Were they just done? And I know that some of these books have been announced and offered up for sale and never made.
Right.
And that's fine. But then I know that I saw them for sale.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot about of the fascination is this search, right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. The
Almost
so
an obsession, or it can be an obsession.
I was thinking, I think all of us are people who quite often wear the dust of rabbit holes, right, on us. We're good at it. We do it a lot. And when you're someone like that, you very quickly realize the limitations of the internet, right? That in fact, not everything is out there. You might be able to get in contact with people who can tell you about it. But is the thing itself actually going to be there, or even a record of the thing itself going to be there? Not necessarily. I read a sort of fabulous nonfiction book about collectors of not really lost films necessarily, but collectors of print film, right? So 35 millimeter prints mostly. And this is the whole thing now, especially with theaters getting rid of their film projectors, that, there's a lot of stuff out there, companies getting rid of their vaults for the most part. And it's mostly, they're not necessarily huge, well-known films. So there's a lot of stuff out there that sometimes people haven't seen in this lifetime, right? It's just, they are essentially lost. But those sorts of things, like, they get auctioned online sometimes, but information about them, it doesn't exist online.
No.
If anything, it's in people's garages and closets, and it's in paper archives, right? And so sometimes those are just gone. They've caught fire or been destroyed.
Well, I'm not going to give away for free everything on this King and Yellow podcast list, everything that we came up with, but we did mention it in the podcast, and I did actually create a list, which I don't always do. Re-listen to the podcast, create a list, categorized it. I'm sure we missed plenty, but television, movies, books, nonfiction, websites, and so forth. I will mention the nonfiction book that I came up with was that could possibly drive you insane if you read it and really understand it, is The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti.
Yeah.
And if you've read it, you understand why. And as far as websites go, you guys are probably all familiar with Rocco's Basilisk. The most terrifying thought experiment of all time. I won't eat into your time and explain it, Brian, but Google. There's a good article about it on Slate. Just Google the most terrifying thought experiment of all time, and you'll come across it. So
yeah, so I benefited during the creation of Memento Mori from a number of different sources. And one, I want to definitely take an opportunity to thank you so much, because My education in weird cinema, a lot of it is actually founded on your Lovecraftian film list, which I like to think that I found pretty early. But the recommendations that you made, so like, my education in that line began in right around 2000 or so, when I first heard about the Lovecraft Film Festival. And so, had some access to the VHS collections that they were turning out at the time. And in 2003, went to the fest for the first time. But then, years later, and I followed unfilmable.com while it was active the first time around. But your list is so well curated and has such fascinating films on it that was the list that really opened me up to the kind of independent work that was being done at a really sort of professional level, right? Like awesome indie film, often from other countries. So I think it's through you that I found The Last Winter, that I found Sauna, Coherence, I think I got from you. Just like amazing films that changed the way that I thought about cinema and weird cinema. But the other was actually, I mentioned my wife before. She's a political scientist. She works on women in politics, women in legislatures around the world, but her field work is largely in Germany. And so, she does a lot of work with the German legislature. And I went with her in 2017. We took that opportunity to have dinner with Joe and Kat. I just sort of reached out and I was like, I know you from the scene, you don't know me. And we'd like to have you over for dinner. So that night was an amazing night, a great conversation. And I told him about the project, told Joe about the project. And so he just started spouting novels, right? And right at the top of his list was Flicker, which I had never read before. And so, I went home and got Flicker and I got like 3 other novels that he suggested for me, and went home and read that. And Flicker's it's a different thing than Memento Mori, but there's some similar DNA there. Just like these kinds of inspirations and different parts of the stew came from all quarters. Some of those opportunities, I tried to create, but I didn't necessarily expect that Joe was going to give me all these great like ideas or these things to look at. So I wanted to thank you so much for that film list, which was huge for me. But then also let you know that we had a really great night, the 4 of us. We actually, there's this amazing Berlin movie theater from 1929. And so after dinner, we all went to this for a midnight movie, and it was a Buster Keaton film. And it's free at midnight in the summer. And so we just like sat in this really hot, silent movie theater that has an organ, while an organist played the musical soundtrack to this Buster Keaton film called Spite Marriage. It was amazing night.
Well, I know Kat's watching, so I'm sure she appreciates this, and I really appreciate you saying that about the list. I feel bad too because I haven't updated it in a little while, so and I need to.
Yeah, we need to put some films like Mr. Jones up there, and
Color Out of Space.
Yeah,
I'm definitely behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could use some help with stuff like that, but it's
Andrew Miglior's book, the Lurker in the Lobby, a guide to the cinema of H.P. Lovecraft. It's a really good book.
Yeah.
But almost immediately after it was published, it became out of date.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
And because not only do we live in a world where it's easy to publish and get published and to self-publish, we live in a world now where I can make a decent film on my phone.
Right.
Yeah.
And now everybody who was denied because the technology was out of reach, it's all right at our fingertips.
And
literally,
even for what is out of reach, there's Kickstarter. and so forth.
There is.
You know, so yeah, that's the nice thing about having a web page. But even so, as opposed to a book, that lists things like this. But even so, that movie list of mine is out of date right now because you need another ingredient, time.
Yeah.
And I only have so much time, and but thank you for saying that, and you've renewed my vow to myself to update that. If for anyone curious about that, that's just at the Lovecraft eZine's website, and just go to Mike's list of Lovecraftian movies at the top, or it's something like that. Every time I'll occasionally post that on the big page, with a couple 100,000 eZine followers, and I get comments everywhere from, "Wow, this is brilliant! Thank you. You've changed my life practically." Not that extreme, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
To, man, the guy running this has no clue what Lovecraft means, what it's about, and so on and so forth. So, but to me, it's like, okay, Absentia is a Lovecraftian film, Lovecraftian in the sense of cosmic horror, Lovecraftian in the sense of the themes. That's it. That's actually the first one on the list because it's alphabetical, but it's also a very easy go-to example, wouldn't you say, Pete? So
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things I liked about, trust me, I'm gonna get there.
I always trust you.
Okay. One of the things I like about Memento Mori is it feels to me like it's the book behind the making of the film in Cigarette Burns.
So that's yeah. Okay. Good.
Right?
Good.
Yeah.
Cigarette Burns is about a guy hunting for a film. This book is about the people that made that film. I know it's not true,
Right.
but it feels thematically the same.
Yeah, that was one of the items on our list, Pete.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns.
Yeah, that's close to true in the multiverse. That's what I would say.
Yes.
That's very close to true in the multiverse.
Yes.
And and to think about that is it's like the film itself is the MacGuffin, the red herring. It drives everything, whether you're creating it or watching it or searching for it. But it in itself is not that important.
Right.
You remember the film Ronin, guys?
Yes.
Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
The MacGuffin. This is a very good if you like spy movies, mystery movies, that sort of thing. It's Robert De Niro and Jean Reno, who I love too. But anyway, it's from 1999, I think, and at the end of the movie, one of the characters asks Jean Reno, so it was a suitcase, wasn't it, or a briefcase, something like that?
It was actually a case for ice skates.
Okay, right. So he says to Robert De Niro, so what was on it? And Robert De Niro says, doesn't matter, or does it matter? Something to that effect. And as the viewer of the movie, you never find out what the MacGuffin really was. But as Pete just said, it doesn't matter, really.
Right.
The same thing is true in Pulp Fiction.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what's in the case.
Right.
It's that everybody's willing to kill for it.
Exactly. Yeah. People are willing to kill for it. Governments are interested in preventing people from having it, right? All this stuff. That's all we need to know. It's about desire.
Yeah. And the same thing is true for, Sneakers?
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't thought about that movie in a while. Man, that's a great movie.
Yeah. So, okay. So we have now talked for more than an hour. Brian, what are you working on now, or what are you working on next?
Yeah.
And Bridget and Rick, do you guys want to interrogate Brian?
Yeah, please.
But go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Okay. So I have two 2 novel manuscripts drafted. Yeah, no.
Well, no, because it's just like, do you want to be a consumer or a creator or a commenter? You can't be 3. You can only be 2.
Right.
So
I can't.
Wait, what?
Don't you tell me what I can't do.
At any one time, you can only be 2. You can't be 3. So
That's true. Yeah, you do. You can switch hats, but you can't. Definitely not going to do 3. So the first one that I drafted in the fall is it's the first of 3, and it's called The Hermit. And the 3 books are The Hermit, The Elephant, and The Messenger. It's weird fiction. It's the sort of elevator pitch is father and son volunteer to help on a excavation of a sailing ship on a beach in Lake Michigan. And the maritime archaeology team finds more in the sand than they bargained for. All right, so that's essentially the pitch right there. But it's sort of, Memento Mori focuses a lot on character. The Hermit focuses a lot on this father-son.
okay.
And the other 2 books are sort of they play out the fate of the entire family, and not just those 2. And it's kind of I think I'll leave it at that. And then the one that I just drafted is, this one's harder to talk about. It is weird noir, set in World War II.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I hope. I'm hoping that the elements are like, people are like, yes, we'll take that. And that one's very much like, I was shooting for sort of weird Raymond Chandler with a little bit of extra, World War II military in there. Yeah.
Well, weird fiction and noir go hand in hand together very well. We've said many times on this show.
Absolutely.
Christina is your partner, you said?
What's that?
Christina's your partner, you said?
Yes, that's right.
Well, she's watching and commenting, and apparently the 3 of us really, really, really agree about Ronin. She said
we all agree about Ronin.
For our first Christmas together, Brian got me 3 DVDs, and one of them was Ronin. So,
Yep.
Bridget, Rick, you guys have comments or questions?
Come on in. The water's fine.
Sure. I've really enjoyed, first of all, listening to you talk about film and film history. And I'm just wondering, since you're a film professor, film scholar, have you written a screenplay? Do you have a desire to write a screenplay?
I do have a desire to write a screenplay. I've written many. I started writing fiction when I was very young, but I set it aside, the fiction writing during college mostly, and then after. So I didn't really come back to prose fiction until just 3 years ago or so. But when I started graduate school, I needed a creative outlet alongside the scholarly stuff. And so I started doing, because I wanted to make movies, I started writing screenplays. And had a little bit of luck early on getting some attention on them. So I've competed a number of times in the Lovecraft Film Festival screenwriting competition. I've won it twice now. And so I wrote this feature, this really weird meta feature in the 2010 competition, and it won. That one's called Cult Flick. And then I won, actually just last year, for a short called Flypaper. And then I wrote and directed a feature film of my own in 2013. Christina was my producer on that. Not weird cinema at all. So I've written, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 features and maybe a half dozen shorts. Yeah.
What was the name of the movie you made?
It's called Non-Traditional. And so it's a sort of indie drama about a woman combat vet who is in her first semester in college. And so she is a non-traditional student. She is a non-traditional combat vet. And it's a fish out of water story, right? Here's this 26-year-old freshman who has a different attitude about things, and she's trying to figure out these 18-year-olds, and they're trying to figure her out, and so on and so forth, right? That sort of thing. It was a story I wanted to tell. I'm a veteran. It was a story that I was really interested in telling, because as a teacher, I had all these male students in my classes who I could tell instantly were vets. I could look out over. I had 45 students, and I'd be like, yeah, you. It was clothes, hair, attitude, tattoos, right? Like the whole deal. And then I knew this was at Ohio State, right? It's like at the time 55,000 undergraduates. So I was like, all right, look, there are women who've been in the service. There are women who've been in combat. They're probably in my classes, but I've never noticed. And then like that mostly on me for not, like I couldn't tell. And that really interested me, both as a way to sort of expand my view of things, my understanding of the world, but also just I thought that was a compelling story, and that it was different than a lot of the conflicts that we've been involved in before. And so actually Christina and I reached out to the Veterans Office at OSU, and they were nice enough to put us in contact with some students. We interviewed, I think, 9 women about their experiences, and I used those interviews along with my own experiences of that to write that script years later. But so wrote Non-Traditional, produced it in the North Country on our own Kickstarter, right? And took it to some festivals, right? It played on the Pentagon Channel, which was great. And then non-theatrical distribution, right? So there was a site where you could rent it to actually show it. Like if you wanted to show it at a campus or whatever, you could rent it that way. So, yeah.
Any
Wow,
comments
that's
on
really
that,
awesome.
Bridget? Any comments on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's really awesome. As a vet myself, we hide it well. So, but
Right?
my husband's retired and is also a non-traditional student. He went back and got his teaching degree after retiring from the military. So yeah, very close to my heart subject for sure. So, so where can people see this now? You said.
That's a great question, actually. I haven't really dealt. It's one of those, like an indie film like this. If it doesn't actually get a distributor, like no one knows about it, right? Unless I were to sort of make it a part-time job to constantly push it online or something like that. And so we still have a box of DVDs, right? Of course we do. So that's kind of it. I'm not sure about the just sort of putting it on YouTube thing. So yeah, it's kind of like it had its time, but
Sure.
I don't know, not sure about the future.
Someday, somebody will buy a storage locker.
Right.
That's right.
There'll be a box of DVDs in there.
Yep.
And they're like, this film is a classic. But it's digital, so let's just throw these away.
Right. It's a DVD, and we don't have those anymore.
So you guys are going to love this.
Or someone will go crazy trying to find a copy of this film.
Right.
Yes.
You guys
And it
gonna
comes full circle.
You guys
Yes,
gonna
exactly.
love this.
So it's
Arthur,
funny
on the,
because
go ahead.
I
Sorry.
had to go and buy an HDMI splitter for my television because I don't have enough HDMI ports
Yep.
for everything. I have other ports, but nobody uses those ports anymore. It's like,
Right.
and my TV's not that old,
They don't.
but we're just moving so much faster now.
Yeah.
That I think things are just going to disappear even faster. And in my lifetime, in my career, we've gone from floppies to 3.5 hard disks to whatever. We now don't even have disk drives anymore, jazz drives and whatnot. Yet the symbol for save is still the same.
Yeah, it's still the disc.
Still the disc.
In my day, stone tablets were good enough, but
Uniform.
yeah. So you guys are gonna love this. I asked about that Margot Kidder book.
You found it. You crowdsourced it.
I did crowdsource it by asking, and Arthur on the live chat said he mentions this book, and I look it up, and it actually is not the book.
It's a whole different book.
Yes, it is a different book. But the point is, this looks fascinating as hell. It's called Drive Shaft by Michael Butler. You guys will love this. I'm reading from Amazon now. It's only like $4 on Kindle, by the way. We've all been there. You leave the cinema, you're buzzing. You were there in that film with those characters. But what if you see those characters relive those scenes not in your head but in reality? When a mysterious cult horror movie from the 1970s pops up on YouTube, Ben simply has to see it. He has to see it partly because it's a horror film, but mostly because it stars Margot Kidder. Ben asks his girlfriend Lena to watch with him. She does. Drive Shaft, however, is no ordinary film, and before they know it, Ben and Lena are trapped within its murky and disturbing world. So, yeah, I don't think that's the movie, or that's the book I've been looking for, but now I have to buy this one.
Yeah.
So thank you, Arthur.
Didn't Margot Kidder make a debut in Sisters? By Brian De Palma.
That would be easy to find out.
Obsession.
But
Is that what you're talking about?
I think it was called Sisters. It was about two supposed twins. It's sort of Hitchcockian Brian De Palma movie.
So, Brian, you mentioned, and I meant to talk about this, but independent film festivals
Sisters, yes, 72.
are almost exclusively big city things. New York City, LA, and if you maybe now a little bit more.
Yeah, certainly the name festivals. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But back in the 70s and 80s, it was there was nothing in let's say suburban middle America.
No. Right.
And the only place I ever saw films like Godzilla vs. Bambi or Message from the Stars was at cons.
Yes.
And I can remember in the early 80s going to cons, and there was just one room that ran nothing but Doctor Who all day and all night.
Yeah, right.
Because nobody could see it.
Right.
And your local PBS station might show you 5 episodes.
Yes. And the horrible quality of them, right? Because they're like 6th gen VHS or sometimes something like that. This is something that occurred to me when we were talking about zines earlier, that I didn't actually have not even a zine phase. Like I really had very little experience with zines personally. In graduate school, I knew someone, and she still does this. She's a librarian, and she specializes in queer zines. Like that's her thing, right? Is sort of archiving queer zines, and so I think in some sense, like knowing her and the work that she did was, I'm sure, rattling around in there when I was thinking about Billy Jacobs and Final Girl. And it made it easier for me to find stuff, right? I sort of had this search string in the back of my head for like, how can I need to learn about Riot Girl zines? Like, let's do this, right? But the thing that I had more tactile experience with was, in my early teens, I, total geek, right? Loving it. Sort of hooked up with a gaming group in Toledo, Ohio, that was also then the Star Trek fan club there. One of the Star Trek fan, and I don't know if they even still do this, but back when definitely your fan club was a ship with a name, and everybody was a crew member, right? Like that was the whole deal for the Star Trek club. And I was mostly there for the gaming, but they had this whole thing of going to cons, but then also the kind of like memorabilia shows that would populate the mall. And so there would always be somebody who had movie stuff, right? One sheets and lobby stills, and sometimes like, toys and other memorabilia. And so getting to know these folks in the club, they had just this amazing collection of all kinds of stuff, just everything. And among that was Star Trek fan fiction.
Right.
Right. And so this is 1984. And so Star Trek fan fiction is stapled 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that you mailed in incredibly thick letter-sized envelopes, right? And you mimeographed it, right, or whatever. And I was just like, wait, hold on now, wait a second. People wrote their own Star Trek stories, Xeroxed it, and then sent it to people they don't know.
Right.
Right.
For no money.
Like this blew my mind, right? Or I saw the 8.5 by 11 folded and stapled with a construction, or a cardstock cover short story, not even a novella, right? But a Star Trek short story. And I was like, what in the hell is going on, right? So like this blew my 12-year-old mind. But that stuck there, that like there were people who wrote stories in these fictional worlds that I loved, that they loved. And certainly before, internet fan fiction, right? Not a thing at that point. Or not that I was aware of. So, that really stuck with me too. That sense of you can create, you don't own it. Be careful with other people's IP, but, like you can use this as a springboard.
Right.
Like you can let your creativity go and tell stories in this world. And other people might be interested in reading it.
Yeah. Rick, did you have anything?
Not really. I was just going to mention I came across a fanzine that was Doctor Who, the fourth Doctor on Star Trek, in a comic store that blew me away. With staples and everything.
Yeah, and just as I'm going to expand on it, just as film festivals and independent film festivals were urban things, so were fanzines, both in distribution, in production and distribution, because there was nobody in suburbia that wanted to carry any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I can remember first coming to Palm Beach and walking into not the independent record store, the third-hand record store.
Yeah, right. And
having it, which might also have been a head shop, but having all this locally produced magazines and fanzines that you would nobody outside the area is going to be interested in, because it's all local.
Right.
And nobody's mailing this stuff to New York City or to Miami. It's just here.
Yep.
So, not only are fanzines urban, they're almost hyper local. So, yeah.
Occasionally there's a scene where someone acts as a snail mail aggregator.
I did that.
So did you do that?
I'll tell you, you finish and I'll tell you the story.
So this happens in the Riot Girl scene, right? That you have a couple of people who, if you send some copies of your zine to this one individual who will then put it on the list, and it's got the price, and here's the title, and here are all the issues that we have, and sometimes it's somebody who's putting out a zine. Often it's not, because again, this is a hat issue, right? Like how many hats can you wear? And I think it was in some ways different with Riot Girl, because they had sort of like a headquarters, right? Like there were a lot of different, members of a really sort of wide diaspora there, but it was a movement in some sense that sort of had a kind of headquarters. And so they, it was easier to be centralized in some of that, or for some of the local things to go wide. But I think you're absolutely right. In most zine situations, it's like intensely local.
So in 1990, I was done with college. I was living at home in Philadelphia, and my girlfriend lived in Westminster, Maryland.
Mhm.
So on Friday at 5 o'clock, I would leave my job, and I'd get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and I would head west. And on my way, before I would even leave, I would stop at my comic book store and pick up my comics from Thursday. And then on the way, almost 3/4 of the way, I would stop in York, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a little comic book store there. And they didn't get their comics till Monday because they're not a major metropolitan area.
Yeah.
They got theirs 3 or 4 days later. So I volunteered to pick up stuff in Philadelphia and drop it off in York.
That's good stuff.
And I would end up taking weird stuff, locally produced. Comico. Comico was out of Norristown, Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia. And I would drop off Comico comics. And so this store had all their comics like 4 days before all the other comic stores in the area, which to them was important.
Yeah.
But with it came all this other weird stuff, little magazines and, Dread and, just all these little comic books and handwritten stuff that just, seemed like gold in York.
Yeah.
But was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But yeah, so two very different things. Anyway, I'm just waxing.
Very cool. Very
yeah,
cool.
no, I'm just remembering this, and it's like I can remember. It's like I stopped buying my comics in Philadelphia and started buying them in York because they gave me a massive discount.
Oh, sure.
Because I'm their courier now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, all right.
So yeah,
Mike, are you happy?
I'm happy. Thank you.
All
Pete.
right. Brian, are you happy?
I am. Yeah.
All right. So what's our chances of seeing these books that you've written sometime soon?
Well, I don't know about sometime soon, but I'm on the schedule. So I'm diving into revisions on the second one. The title of that is Above and Beyond, that one I think I'm going to try to place first. But I think the trilogy is something that I have to figure out some background work on that one. That one might take a little bit longer, but I'm hoping that Above and Beyond will go out to people who might be interested just maybe in 3 months or so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
So again, the name of Brian's book is Memento Mori, The Fathomless Shadows by Brian Hauser, Hauser. And it's available in Kindle and in print. On Kindle, it's only $6.99. So, it's a hell of a price for this book. I really did enjoy this book. And I'm glad that, Brian, and I'm glad that Pete recommended it to me. So
I'm glad that Ross sent it to me.
yeah, I appreciate it. And
the funny thing about that is, like, I sent Ross that blurb, and I'm like, really, really sorry. This is what I feel like I have to write. And Ross is like, no. This is exactly what we wanted from you.
I am in love with that blurb. I know I told you at Necronomicon, that's an amazing blurb for all the reasons that you said, right? That it doesn't give anything away. It does exactly what it should do.
It's just got that touch of insanity that fits well with the book.
Thank you. It was very generous of you. Thank you.
It was a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. And, I still have it. It's part of the collection.
Yay.
So it goes on the shelf.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So I want to talk about a few things. First of all, movies, of all things, right?
Yeah.
I have not seen this yet, but I may end up watching this tonight because I just found out about it and it looks fascinating. I'm probably saying this wrong, but it's Impedagore. It's available on Shudder. I think it's a Shudder original.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it Thai or
Indonesian.
Indonesian.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the filmmaker is, again, I'm probably mispronouncing, but Yoko Anwar. He did a remake in 2017 of Satan's Slaves, which was a huge hit in Indonesia apparently. And then he did a superhero movie in 2019 called Gundala. Apparently this guy fights orphan assassins. So for that reason alone, I know Pete Frolic will watch it.
Sure.
But, yeah. Anyway, this, I don't want to read too much about this. I don't even want to read this whole article, myself. I keep stopping myself. Has returned to horror with his latest effort, Impedagore, and right from the opening moments, it's clear that he's anything from a one-hit wonder. Created an uncommonly effective film that is smart and provocative, in addition to being all kinds of creepy. Whatever you do, make sure you're watching the film right from the beginning because it kicks off with an absolutely spellbinding opening sequence. And yeah, it just, I don't want to say any more, but in some degree of some of the stuff that we've been talking about, it looks like it might have that in common. I was also thinking too, and bear with me a little bit on this for just a second, but Scott Thomas's writing is just spectacular. Okay, that said, it's not the only thing that drew me to the Sea of Ash in the first place. It was this rabbit hole thing, like lost films, for example, or lost books or whatever. It's this guy who's researching what happened to this other guy in a previous century, and what happened to another guy in a previous century, and so forth. It's sort of three stories in one. That's has nothing to do with film, but that's part of why I love Scott's novella, The Sea of Ash. So anyway, Impedagore looks really good. Has anyone seen Relic? The new one yet? I have not.
I haven't seen it yet. It's still
I've
behind.
seen it.
Okay. What did you think, Bridget?
I thought it was really atmospheric. It was pretty slow, but in a good way. And it really delved into the psyche and whether, is somebody, the mom in the movie is suffering from, I think it's dementia specifically. And just, what is she experiencing? That's part of her dementia, and what part of it is an entity, or does it matter? It's pretty fascinating.
Sounds a bit Philip K. Dickian in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know what you thought since you've seen it, because I keep hearing differing things. Like people either love it or hate it.
Well, I think it is really slow, and there are some parts that are really uncomfortable, but they're supposed to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a review that I read that said Relic reminds us that we all become ghosts in the end. And I found that really captured the feeling of it. And if you're not wanting to explore like the relationships between the characters and it goes dark and it goes deep, and if you're just looking for a horror movie thrill, you're not going to like it.
Okay.
But if you're willing to dive a little bit deeper into exploring the relationships and the psyche and the darkness and moodiness, it's great.
It sounds like a yes that you have to be in the right mood for.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you for that. I think you put it on my watch list at some point in the future with that. So,
Mike?
Yeah.
Did you finish the left-right game?
No, I've listened to the first episode, but I've been really sick, and I usually listen to a lot of stuff when I go to bed at night, as you know, Pete, and I
Mhm.
keep falling asleep the last few nights.
Well, you're sick, so that's good.
But what I've heard so far, well, I shouldn't say just the first episode. I've heard the first episode and a half, and I've heard enough that I'm in love with it already. You've definitely sold me on this by saying listen to it, but now I've heard enough that I'm sold on it again. I mean, meeting the same hitchhiker in the tunnel and so forth is just one thing I'll say,
Yeah.
without really spoiling anything.
Look, I watch and listen to a lot of garbage.
You sure do.
And there are a few things that I recommend.
Yeah.
The left-right game is some. Brian, have you listened to it?
I have not yet. No.
Oh, really good. Just creepy as all hell, and done as a podcast within a podcast.
Again, it came from Reddit, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Speaking of things, yeah. The left, right, and it's 10 episodes long. I mean, it's a completed story arc.
Yep.
The sound quality is out of this world.
Yeah. So the whole show is sponsored by this speaker company called Sonos.
Yeah.
And Costco has these speakers. I think they start at $400.
Is each episode an hour?
The new
About
Bose.
45 minutes.
Okay.
It's how long?
45 minutes.
Yeah.
It's under 10 hours.
Is
Yeah.
Sonos the new Bose speakers?
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, wow.
So, Bose can't, you can't boast about being Bose anymore because it's in my car. They're good speakers, but they're the standard now.
I don't even have the standard, but it was a dream of mine to have Bose at some point, and still an unfulfilled dream, and now we've moved on to Sonos.
I'll tell you a secret. Mr. Bose went to my high school.
Oh, really?
Yep.
No longer a secret.
Yeah, now everyone knows.
Yeah.
I started listening to the left right game because of you, Pete, and I'm probably on episode 6 now.
Yeah.
I listen to podcasts mostly as I'm driving to and from work, as a lot of
Oh, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, I know, because it says right at the beginning, it's like, if you're in a car, just be aware. Sounds may happen inside in front of you or behind you or whatever. But I did okay knowing that. But it is, because it's like you're in the convoy with them and you hear the sounds and you're like,
Yes. Yeah.
it's great. I'm enjoying it so far.
The first time I hit the car crash, I thought we were in a car crash.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, it's really good, isn't it, Bridget? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. It's definitely captivating, and it's got some really interesting threads in there. I'm waiting to see how it resolves.
Yeah.
The Left Right Game podcast. So, yeah. So Donnie Darko is a movie that I have loved for years. I have never seen S. Darko, and I thought I would ask the man who has seen every horrible movie ever if I should bother. No?
No.
Okay.
Just keep your memory of Donnie Darko pure.
All right.
Okay.
I'll do that. So,
It's-
can you erase The Hobbit from my memory?
I cannot relate.
The movie?
I cannot erase The Hobbit from your memory, but I can keep you from watching S. Darko.
Okay.
If you're a fan of Donnie Darko, do not watch S. Darko.
I am a fan of Donnie Darko, yeah.
It's it's like if you loved Alien and Aliens, don't watch Aliens 3.
Right.
Just
Or The Godfather 3.
yeah, it's just not.
Yeah.
We just don't
Oh, The
talk about
Godfather 3 isn't that bad. It's not as good as the first two, but it is a good movie. It's got its moments. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like
Once is enough for The Godfather Part 3.
I can't remember who it was on our Facebook feeds was showing his daughter the Alien series, and he went from Aliens 2 to Aliens, Aliens to Aliens 4. And she was like, "Wait, what happened to Newt? And where's Aliens 3?" And he's like, "I had to take away the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. I'm not going to make you
is
watch
3
it."
the one that Joss Whedon directed or wrote or whatever?
No, I can't remember who wrote
He
it.
wrote. I thought he worked on the fourth one.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I think he did the 4th.
Alright.
But yeah, it was, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The Boys 2 days ago came out on Amazon, and they released the first 3 episodes, and I've never thought I would enjoy a guy singing along with his gills so much.
Is that what episode? That's not episode 1.
I think that's like 2 he's singing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's
Definitely.
episode 2.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
watched episode.
yeah, that's something like you'd be like, oh, come on, that's Mystery Science Theater material. But on The Boys, it works. You know? Oh my god. So anyway, yeah. I don't know why they don't do it just like Bosch and just release all of them, but you know, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean, who thinks of this shit? Singing along with your gills? Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
They made talking to fish believable for once.
Yeah.
When he talks about how he learned when he first heard when he talked to fish.
Yeah,
that was done very well.
Yeah, he's like saying that in the pet stores the little goldfish were saying, save me, please. And I was like, man, my heart was breaking listening to that, you know. Okay, so there's apparently a new movie on Netflix that I have not seen, and it's a book, and I have not read the book. Sounds like I need to. I'm curious if any of you have, called I'm Thinking of Ending Things.
Sounds
I have not. It's in my queue. As soon as I finish Shakespeare and Hathaway, season 2, I'm just really into binge watching bad or even good British mysteries.
Yeah.
Now, and
because
they're easy to ignore and write to.
Do you have BritBox?
I do have BritBox.
I figured. So it's a book too by Ian. It's IAIN Reid, REID. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is not a suicidal. What's that one? 13 Reasons Why or whatever. That's the first thing I thought of when I saw this title. But it's not that at all. It's apparently some sort of time travel reality weird thing. It sounds intriguing. So if you're not aware of it, maybe check it out. I'm not endorsing it because I haven't seen it yet. Let's see. For those of you who love Devil's Night in Detroit in the 70s or 80s, there's a book coming out by Curtis Lawson called Devil's Night.
Yes.
So it looks really, really good. Also, I haven't had a chance to read this yet, but this was sent to me from Hippocampus. The Skeleton Melodies. Look at that.
That's
cover.
Supposed to be really good.
Yeah, look at that cover, man. That's good. By Clint Smith. Ted Klein likes his writing. Dan Chan, author of Ill Will. Also Laird and John like it. In fact, Laird's got a blurb right on the cover. A splendid collection brimming with viscerally elegant horrors. Laird Barron, author of Worst Angels. which if you haven't read yet, you should read. But you know, they they it, they've got somebody working there. Jordan Smith, I think is his name. No relation, I'm assuming. But he at Hippocampus, and he wanted to send me the book, and I was like, I was about to type. I don't know, man. I'm really behind. And then I saw Ted Klein and Laird and John and others blurbing this, and I'm like, yeah, send it. And then this looks good too. The Night Will Find Us by Matthew Lyons, Lyons. In this supernatural thriller, 6 teenagers attempt to survive the horrors, both human and supernatural, that haunt them as they try to escape a seemingly infinite forest where far older, crueler things wait for them with plans of their own. I don't know, sounds very Laird Barron-ish to me, but it's on my list to read. So check it out. I don't remember if I think Skeleton Melodies is out now. I don't think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Devil's Night I think comes out in September. Devil's Night by Curtis Lawson is in September. I'm not sure about The Night Will Find Us by Matthew Lyons. But I'll say, as I've said a million times, especially with the small press, if there's a pre-order button available, and you think you're going to want to read this, go ahead and pre-order, because it really is encouraging for the authors and the publishers. And there's so much available to us today that without the indie press would not be available, because the big publishers are there to publish books, yes, hopefully good books, but they don't continue to do that if they don't make money. And indie press, again, it's like stapling together fanzines. You want to make money, but it's an act of love, So it's something you do because you think it's important to do. So I will also mention again, because I'm behind on putting the audio editions up because of being so sick with COVID and shingles and so forth. But Dark Blood Comes from the Feet by Emma Gibbon. She is next on the list to get the audio edition treatment. And so I feel bad about that. And if you missed that one, be sure to pick up that book. That's a collection by Emma Gibbon and called Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. Great title. And it's a very good collection. And then the last but not least on books is a book called Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. It is out, available for Kindle and in print. How far I'm reading from Amazon now. How far would you go? This just seems very interesting to me. How far would you go to bring back someone you love? When Chris's son dies in a tragic car crash, her world is devastated. The walls of her grief close in on Chris's life until one day, a small cut on her finger changes everything. A drop of blood falls from Chris's hand onto her son's roadside memorial, and later that night, Chris thinks she sees his ghost outside her window. Only, is it really her son's ghost, or is it something else? Something evil. Soon, Chris is playing a dangerous game with forces beyond her control in a bid to see her son alive once again. Josh Mallerman blurbed this. Really liked it. Jonathan Jans blurbed this. Hopefully we can get her on the show sometime. We'll see. But either way, here's yet another female writer who is doing great things. So check it out. Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. So, yeah. Anyone got anything else? I do have
So,
a few other
oh,
things
go ahead,
if you
Rick.
don't. So, but go ahead.
I just want to mention that one of the great writers of Sword and Sorcery, Charles Saunders, died this week. And he was probably the first Sword and Sorcery writer to write convincing African characters. And if you want to find his books, they're all available in the Lulu's self-publishing site.
Okay. Bridget, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things since you mentioned Shudder, and also kind of along the lines of Brian's book. There's a Korean movie on Shudder right now called Warning, Do Not Play, and it's about yeah,
I like
it's
it already.
it's about a lost student film that she's hunting for and wanting to write a screenplay, and she's trying to hunt that down to get some inspiration, and it's good. It has a little bit of a different take on it. So I recommend that. And then also,
So tell me, Brian, are you going to hunt this movie down and watch it? I bet you are.
Maybe I've already hunted this movie down.
Anyway, go on, Bridget. Sorry.
Also, there's an excellent documentary on Shudder right now, In Search of Darkness, and it's all about 80s horror movie history, and it's wonderful. So I highly recommend.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, Shudder is one hell of a deal. What is it, like $6 or $7 a
I
month?
think it's $4.99.
Yeah, even poor people like me can afford Shudder, and it's got so much content, and it's only getting better. You know, now they're coming out with Shudder originals like Host and this movie I mentioned a few minutes ago. So, there is I only discovered this. This is a 5-year-old article. But I mean, I would hope that most people listening to this have read, or excuse me, have watched It Follows by now. But on ihorror.com, here's a 5-year-old article, and you can Google it by the title. David Robert Mitchell answered a bunch of questions about the It in It Follows. So, you know, I don't want to take the 6 minutes we have left to dive into it, but it's a pretty interesting article. I really liked that movie. What did you guys like that one? I know it kind of, some people don't.
I'm a big fan of that film.
Yeah, I think It Follow works really, really well. It's another example of a independent filmmaker doing something creative with a limited budget.
Yes, and it's about what the final quote in that movie, I forget what classic book the kid is reading from, but the quote is basically paraphrased like this, that it's about this horror that you know it's coming, you know it will get you, and it will never stop. So that's kind of what It Follows is about. It's going to get you in the end. So, although, you know, I don't know why you just don't go have sex with some evil person and then you're done, but that kind of solves it right there. But, or am I missing something, Pete? Would that not solve it?
I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Okay. So, not that I want to have sex with an evil person, but, or anyone besides my wife, but it's just like, if you're in that situation, it's kind of like Louis in Interview with a Vampire. He's so conflicted about killing people. Just go find some pedophiles and murderers, and, you know, and suck their blood, man. Problem solved.
The sort of Dexter solution, right?
What is the big deal? I mean, really. So, yeah.
I did. So speaking of Shudder, I watched The Shed.
The Shed.
The Shed. And it is, you know, I was really, really surprised. It is, Near Dark meets Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
It's on Shudder.
I believe so.
It's called The Shed.
The Shed. This kid figures out this a vampire is in this guy's shed. This kid's shed, and he has to deal with that, plus his alcoholic grandfather and the bullies that are at school. And there are some very strong 80s teen movie beats that are hit. There's one scene where he has to run from school all the way home, and he just cuts through yards, and it's that scene where he's trying to beat Jennifer Grey.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is Ferris Bueller. And that's not a bad thing. It's just to see it in a horror film.
No, it's not a bad thing. Ferris Bueller
Sounds
rocks.
amazing.
So yeah, The Shed.
The Shed. Okay. I'll have to see that. And sometimes I stumble across an article about a movie, and I'm like, I'm gonna go watch this right now. It's the pandemic, so everything's being released. I don't have to wait for the theaters, nothing like that. And I can't, because it doesn't release till November the 6th or something. The Dark and the Wicked. This is on Bloody Disgusting. This is the title of the article. The Dark and the Wicked is a chilling descent into nihilistic evil. So
Awesome.
that's all
Yeah, but that's like dinner at the Rawley House. I'm not sure.
Oh, don't talk about your wife that way. That's just wrong.
They left me. I'm all alone for the long weekend.
Where'd they go?
They went to see Grandma in Tallahassee.
Finally grew some common sense and showed you the door, huh?
Yep.
So, anyway, Brian?
Yeah, I don't know if your panelists have talked about it before, but the thing that really blew me away recently was Dave Made a Maze.
Oh my God!
Dave what?
That is an incredible film.
It is an incredible film.
Wait,
so
what's
this
the
is
title?
Dave Made a Maze.
Oh, Dave Made
It's
a Maze. Okay.
I have friends who tell me there's a lot of Doctor Who sort of in it, inspiration wise, but I also think it's the best adaptation of Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves you're ever likely to get.
Really?
It's a horror comedy.
Yes.
About this artist with creative block who builds just a cardboard box fort in his living room that is immensely bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Somebody mentioned this on the show before, and I completely forgot about it. Yeah.
It's on both Tubi and Prime right now, Amazon.
Okay.
I really recommend it. It's so tightly done, and the art direction is just fantastic.
Okay, that's what I'm watching tonight. Okay, there we go.
I gotta watch this.
Yeah.
It is
That sounds awesome.
It plays as a comedy, but then it's very, very black.
It's so black. There's gore, but all of the gore is.
We gotta go.
You're still like, what the hell is happening? Amazing.
We gotta go because otherwise YouTube gets pissed off when I go past the 2 hour exactly mark. But Kat asked, thanks. Your partner answered the question. Dave Made a Maze is not an adaptation of House of Leaves. You said it was as close to as an adaptation as. I'm going to go watch that actually right now, and then I'm going to probably go watch Impedagore. So there's some, we talked about some good movies.
Don't forget Lovecraft Country's on it again tonight.
Yep. So, all right. Well, Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. And
thanks, Brian.
So, Memento Mori, The Fathomless Shadows, right? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, man. Thanks a lot, and thanks for doing the interview. And Pete and Rick and Bridget, thanks to you guys as well. So we will see everybody next week. Thanks.
Great meeting.